Sir George. It's a pleasure to serve on your chairmanship. And may I also thank my honourable friend, my Berkshire colleague, the Honourable Member for Slough, for his excellent work on this important issue. He's a doughty champion for people from across our county, obviously focused on his constituency. May I also very briefly, in the time that I'm allowed, thank families who are under enormous pressure at this time, incredible pressure, working incredibly hard to keep up with a huge range of increases in costs, whether that's from the price of food, which has rocketed, energy costs, mortgages, rents, a whole series of things. And in the time allowed to me, I just would like to briefly mention a few of these points, and I hope the Minister will be able to respond. And in particular, I hope he'll be able to direct his remarks to colleagues like myself and colleagues from Luton and Slough, where we have many residents in high-cost areas who are under particular pressure because of the high cost of renting and buying homes in the southeast of England and other high-cost areas. First of all, I think it's absolutely staggering that food prices have risen by around 20% in the last few months. And imagine the impact on most families that this is happening. Common staple goods like breakfast cereals, basic foods like Weetabix, cornflakes, pasta, eggs, cheese, other goods that every family relies on in everyday life, which is almost impossible to substitute in a weekly shop. These have all gone up enormously, and this is affecting people across the whole country in the most dreadful way. Families are really struggling because of this, and there's no easy way to avoid this. There's simply no way to substitute most of these products because they're so basic and so commonplace. And as you can imagine, children are desperate for their favourite foods. They're often really keen to have specific things. Even if those are own brand items, the costs have gone up enormously. Equally, the cost of housing has skyrocketed as well. I've had constituents I mentioned, like my honourable friend from Newport West, we were in the debate yesterday about the terrible pressures in the mortgage market. And I mentioned a couple of constituents who are under enormous pressure, and this is common in my area, huge additional costs on mortgages. In one case, I spoke about a family where they were paying £800 extra a month for a mortgage on a 3-bedroom property in a suburb. Another resident who lives in Reading Town Centre having to pay £400 a month extra on the mortgage on her flat, and she's already suffering from the cladding crisis and has unresolved issues because of cladding problems with her property. So imagine the pressure that a person in that situation is under at this terrible time. So I do hope the Minister will kind of will broaden his response and address some of the related issues around housing, and indeed the effect on renters, who of course their landlords are under enormous pressure to put up rents because of the increase in mortgages. And that's a related issue, which is hugely important. And as was said earlier, and I think my honourable friend from Barnsley East made an excellent point about this, the number of families who are living on very, very modest incomes, rents increasing dramatically. In the area that I represent, there's been an increase in the proportion of people who rent and a decrease in the number of people who can afford to buy because of the high cost of housing. And that puts particular pressure on many young families, many living in terraced housing or flats in our town centre. But in addition to that, and I hope the Minister will respond to this, energy prices are still extremely high. We still haven't seen a proper windfall tax. There's still enormous pressure on households because of this problem. That will only get worse in the winter and the colder months. It might not seem so immediate to some people now, but it is going to be a huge challenge for many, many residents facing enormous costs. And particularly, if I may make a very brief mention of the many people in this country who still live in poorly insulated properties. And in the areas I represent, we have a very large number of terraced houses, equivalent to many British cities and towns of a similar size, such as Derby or Portsmouth or London boroughs or other areas in the north of England, where much of the housing stock is poorly insulated. And this is a related problem which is hugely important, and I do hope the Minister will be able to update us on the government's action on this. So far they have been woeful on this point, and a series of problems have not been addressed, both under the Coalition and under the Conservative governments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, George.